my whole identity was really wrapped up with this family and the money and the cars and the $1 million houses and the Prada clothing. And it was like being movie stars on the east side of Cleveland. And I was also smart, did well in school, and I had a lot of friends, and I had reached all the benchmarks of what success would look like. And I thought that everything was really going great for me. I had this family and all these accolades and all these awards. But when I got to college, I completely fell apart in complete depression. I had a complete identity crisis. And when I realized I was pretending to be Stacy instead of being Stacy, I didn't really have an authentic sense of self at all. I was totally overwhelmed, and I ended up admitting myself into a psychiatric hospital because I didn't know what to do. I feared going out into the real world because I knew that I would fall apart and fail.
Welcome to Linda's Corner, where we bring more hope, healing, and happiness to the world. My name is Linda Bjork, and today we're going to be talking about being authentic. I'm delighted to welcome Stacy Blemaster. Stacy is an author and an overcomer. You can learn more about Stacy and her book at her website, stacyblemaster.com, and I'll include that link in the show notes. Welcome, Stacy. I'm so glad that you could join with me today.
Hi, Linda. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. And I had a chance to watch your video, your presentation on Booked Naples, and I listened to your story and I thought, wow, I am so grateful that I have a chance to be able to talk with you and to be able to help you to share your story because I think it is so important. And you started with a statement. You said, I am a Goldberg. And when you said that, I thought, well, I don't know what a Goldberg is. But as you continue the story, it was like, oh, I see why that matters. Would you mind sharing your story and helping our listeners understand why that was important?
Well, that was my whole identity growing up. My grandparents had emigrated from Poland, and they had been Jewish, and they had been the recipients of a lot of anti-Semitism and stories that they would not even share with the rest of our family. They were so bad. But I know from my grandfather's sister, who wrote about the fact that they couldn't even leave their homes. They were so scared of the Polish. And then I knew that my grandmother's brother had died in the war, and she would never talk about that. And whenever I had projects from school or something, and I would try to find out about the family, she would just spit on the floor and say "Shasha," and she didn't want to talk about anything from the past. And they had emigrated here with no money, and my grandfather had started a grocery stand, and he had been really successful, and he ended up having a real estate business, which he grew into a $200 million building business on the east side of Cleveland, Ohio. And I think what happened with my family is they really wanted to reinvent themselves and forget about the past. And they were a very wealthy, prominent Jewish family on the east side of Ohio, the suburbs. And, what I always heard growing up is we were one of the three wealthiest Jewish families on the east side. And our whole identity was being a Goldberg. And everybody seemed to know who we were. I would walk into places, are you a Goldberg? And we had this identity, and we had donated a lot of buildings. We have a wing at the Cleveland Clinic, a temple named after us, different buildings. There's a Parkinson's Center now named after my uncle who died of Parkinson's. And my whole identity was really wrapped up with this family and the money and the cars and the $1 million houses and the Prada clothing. And it was like being movie stars on the east side of Cleveland. And I was also smart, did well in school, and I had a lot of friends, and I had reached all the sort of benchmarks of what success would look like on the east side of Cleveland. And I thought that everything was really going great for me. I had this family and all these accolades and all these awards, and I went to an Ivy League college, Brown University. But when I got to college, I completely fell apart in complete depression. Um, I had a complete identity crisis. And what I realized was that I mean, it was later coined for me. I didn't have this coined term at the time, but that I really had an as if personality. I was pretending to be Stacy instead of being Stacy. I didn't really have an authentic sense of self at all. My parents were basically adult children who were very needy, who I had to take care of, who I had to please. They basically lived vicariously through me and my achievements. And I really was a shell of myself and had no idea who I really was. My mother was very verbally, emotionally, and psychologically abusive. My father was very weak-willed and couldn't stand up for me at all. With the tirades that my mother would insult me with. And I really had no reflection or mirroring of my parents as to who I really was. And I became a people pleaser and an overachiever and did what I always felt like I was supposed to do. And when I went to Brown University, it was a very diverse culture. And there were people from all over the world. And I certainly wasn't the smartest or the prettiest or the most popular. And all of these externals that I had hooked my identity on, that I'd hinged my identity on, all fell to the ground and I had no identity. I didn't know what my preferences were. I didn't know how to make choices. I had all different kinds of friends from all different groups and couldn't decide who to be friends with. Um, I struggled academically for the first time. And I really fell into a complete depression by the end of the second semester of my freshman year. Entered the mental health system, went to see Peter Kramer, the psychiatrist who wrote about listening to Prozac, the best-selling book. And he all of a sudden in the therapy opened up my eyes to abuse that I had occurred in my childhood. And I was not ready to internalize that at the time, and basically walked out of the office and just sufficed on psychopharmacological medication that didn't actually cure the problem at all. And then was in and out of therapy throughout my 4 years of college. I was kind of up and down, mostly depressed, mostly struggling, mostly walking around like a ghost in Providence, Rhode Island, having no idea who I was or how to behave. And by the second semester of my senior year, I was auditioning for MFA programs in acting. I was a theater major, and I realized the worst thing I could do was go ahead and be a professional actress, because it was actually like an addiction, like alcoholism. It was a way of being a fake personality and not being myself. And I withdrew my applications. I was walking 5 days a week to cognitive therapy, which was a total bust. I couldn't make any sense out of this intellectual form of therapy that was asking me to deconstruct my thoughts. I was totally overwhelmed, and I ended up admitting myself into a psychiatric hospital because I didn't know what to do. I feared tremendously going out into the real world because I knew that I would fall apart and fail. I was already basically binge eating and living in my apartment senior year, not leaving. I dropped down to one class. And I was really close to being suicidal. I got my aunt and uncle to help me admit myself into a psychiatric hospital. My mother wouldn't help me. She said hospitals are for people who can't get out from underneath the table, and sent me back to school. And the psychiatrist that my aunt and uncle took me to in Cleveland said, I don't think she needs to go, but if she wants to go, she should go. So I ended up not really knowing too much about what would help me, but knowing that what I needed to do was get away as far away from my family as I could. So I chose a hospital in Kansas, which is the farthest away from any of my family members. My brother was in school at University of, Maryland. And I was there for a year and a half, where they diagnosed me with borderline personality, until I had a manic episode a year and a half into my stay. And then they realized they had misdiagnosed me, and that I really had bipolar disorder, which they hadn't really asked enough probative questions about when I first got there. Otherwise, they probably would have been able to figure it out, because I had a couple, at least one hypomanic episode in college where I was running miles and miles at 5 a.m. in the morning and staying up all night for days on end, writing a screenplay, which I wasn't a screenplay writer or a runner. Um, but my parents, I think, didn't really want me at the hospital to begin with because I think a lot of my secrets were coming out from my childhood, which really threatened them and the family. And they wanted to keep things close to the vest. There was sexual abuse in the family, a lot of patriarchal control, a lot of hidden secrets about the money. We had all been given trust funds, but they wouldn't give us, people running the company wouldn't give us any information financially. My therapist in college told me the first thing you need to do is find out about your finances. And they just stonewalled me and wouldn't answer any questions. And it was a male dominated family and there was a lot of control issues. So they didn't want secrets to come out. So they were upset with the hospital. They took me out of the hospital. My father told me a story where he asked the director of the hospital said she'll never be able to survive outside of a hospital. She'll be in a hospital for the rest of her life. She won't even make the plane ride to Florida. And my father somehow had a hunch and said, "Do you even know what my daughter looks like? Can you describe what my daughter looks like?" And he didn't. And that was proof to my father that, they didn't even really know me well. And although I was upset at the time because I really didn't think I could survive outside of the hospital and I didn't trust my parents, and my aunt and uncle had taken a back seat by then because they had been threatened by my mother to stay out of our insular family business. It ended up being the best thing for me because I don't think I would have ever gotten out of the Menninger hospital system in Kansas. Most people didn't. They stayed satellites of the hospital and just went to halfway houses and apartments and stayed there for the rest of their lives. Um, I found a doctor who gave me his pager number and totally invested in me. And I was able to call him over every little thing that I was completely freaked out about, which was a lot because there's a big regressive aspect that happens when you're in a hospital for a year and a half. You're not paying bills, you're not functioning in daily life. And I was, after meeting this doctor, Dr. Benaroche in Boca Raton, Florida, he put me in, I was in an apartment, a job, a car 2 weeks after I met him. And I would have never been able to survive unless he had gotten all in with me. He knew how badly I wanted mental health, and I was willing to do anything to get it. And I was in therapy with him 3 days a week with his pager number. And he got me through that. I was in Florida for a year and a half before I moved back to Cleveland. And I really give the credit to this doctor for blurring the lines of his professional responsibility and becoming a personal advocate for me and helping me to get on my feet and be able to be a member of society today. I have raised 3 children, 2 of which are severely autistic, which are twin boys that are 22. I have a daughter at Stanford who's 20, who is very successful, majoring in chemical engineering, working for a hydrogen startup. I did end up getting divorced. I had a wonderful first husband, but as I became more independent and psychologically assured of myself and a stronger identity, it was no longer a good fit. He was controlling and he was very invested in my family and I think my family's money, and really wouldn't let me separate from them, which is really what I needed to do. And I met my second husband after I got divorced, who's my soulmate. I wrote a book which really helped my healing and speaking my truth and getting out of what they coined at Menninger was an as if personality, which was basically acting as if I was Stacy and not really feeling like I was Stacy. I was pretending all the time while I felt completely vacuous inside and unable to have a relationship with myself or any authentic relationships with other people. And over the past 30 years, with a lot of therapy, and then the culmination with writing this book, I was able to really tell my truth about the abuse that I suffered and my trajectory in 12-step program of Emotions Anonymous, and finally getting to what it took to really find my authentic self, which was really a lot of deep dark truth telling of secrets that started with my doctor in Florida, Dr. Benaroche, and then continued for decades after that. Now I live in Florida. I travel back to Cleveland every other week to see my autistic sons. And I have two dogs, and I'm blissfully happy. And I just thank my lucky stars that I had an advocate in Dr. Benaroche. Otherwise, I could very well have been in a hospital for the rest of my life.
Wow, Stacy. When you start with the story and the way that it looks, like I am a Goldberg. I am a person who is basically a movie star. Everyone knows who I am. We are perfect. We look great and we are great. We're benefactors of the society. We have all the credentials. And it's interesting when it starts with I am. And then as you go through and have a chance to separate from the family, from the expectations, from that facade, and be able to say, maybe ask a question, who am I? And then this journey has been a lot about identity. Who am I? And when I find out who I am I okay? Am I lovable? Am I someone that I can hold my head up high? I mean, I could hold my head up high when everybody thought that I was, a movie star, when I was important because of my wealth, because of my status, but just me, without that, without those layers, am I still okay? And as you go through and you talked about the real story, not the story that everybody is aware of, but the underlying story that included abuse of several types. And that was supposed to be kept quiet so that we can maintain the facade and just keep playing the game. And you did not continue that cycle. You chose to break out. And it was a painful breaking out that took steps and stages. It was interesting to me that near the very beginning, you had a doctor, someone who was paying attention, who said, what's really going on is you need to unpack your story, your history. But at that time, you weren't ready for it. And so it sounds like you kind of pushed that back down and said, that can't be it. It's got to be something else. Let me try something else. And so naturally we go to, well, give me some prescription. Give me something that's going to help me feel better. But eventually you were ready to let that go. I loved when you said, I wanted mental health. We use the term mental health to just mean a category, but it was, I want to be healthy. I want to be mentally healthy. I want to feel good. I want to be. So just, I don't know, so many facets and so many struggles as trying to work out who I am. And then the pushback of, Stacy, you're not playing the game. You're not keeping our secrets quiet. You're telling people you've broken our code here, and that's not acceptable. So I can just imagine that pushback. I am so grateful that you found an advocate, that you were not trapped forever in a mental institution, which was initially intended to help you heal, but was morphing into a way of life that would be forever.
Mm-hmm.
That wasn't what you were going for at all.
No,
You were ready for the next step. Oh, I'm so grateful you found someone who got it.
thank God. That's what my speech was about, that you listened to the power of one and how
Right.
one person can really save another person's life if they're really dedicated and interested and willing to do what it takes. So I think a lot of people, professionals, also in personal relationships, people are not really willing to do what it takes to save another person. We stand on the periphery and do what is in our people, what's in their professional purview. But this guy really went all in for me. And if he hadn't, I probably would have been labeled as crazy for the rest of my life and thought of myself as that. And I also liked what you said about trying to find out who I was. That's the title of my book, To Be or Not to Be. And that's what I've struggled with my whole life. Like, am I to be or not to be? Am I to be who I am or not to be? Do I have the courage to be who I am or not to be? And I even tried to take my life thinking, it was not really worth it, that I really didn't have value. And I've struggled with that on and off throughout my life. Do I even have the value? Because, what's amazing to me is with all the money and the talents that I had and the things I had, quote unquote, going for me, I didn't really have a mother's love. I didn't have love for my mother, and I didn't really have a father who was willing to defend me. And without that, I didn't really have self-esteem to even think that I was valuable to be on this planet. So,
Wow. That thought of to be or not to be, which is part of Shakespeare, it's a play, which you felt like you were on a stage. And also the idea of am I allowed to exist or not, which is also part of that story, that the cycle, the patterns just keep repeating. Wow. Okay. So I have a couple questions for you. One is uh, the idea of what we call imposter syndrome is what you have experienced, only yours was more stronger. But most of us have an echo, a shadow of that, where I'm not sure who I am, and I'm not sure if I'm allowed to be myself, if I'm allowed to take up space, if I'm allowed to exist. Am I worthy of any of that? So, how did you get from a place of thinking I don't to thinking I do?
well, I had to do a massive study, like a research study on what it would be like, what it was like to be a person. So I was constantly studying people on television, people on the news, trying to figure out what human behavior was like, what made people tick, what made me people feel like they were worthy to be on this planet. I would read books because I really had no idea. Um, so I studied for a long time to figure out what does it really feel like to be a person and to be happy with yourself, and what is that like? And it's still a study for me that's ongoing. Unfortunately, I'm 55, um, but I still have the remnants of the as if personality of I could slip into that. And I constantly and having discussions and watching and investigating. What does it feel like to be a three-dimensional person and to be okay with that whole myriad of feelings a human being has? What is it okay to feel like a sexual person, a person that gets angry, a person that gets ashamed, a person that gets envious, a person that gets egotistic, all those things that you read about when you read in literature, psychology, and trying to feel comfortable in my skin being a three-dimensional personality rather a two-dimensional personality. So I'm in a lifelong study to feel three-dimensional and feel okay with that and not lapse into pretending. And that's what, and I slowly get more and more comfortable with that. Um, as I look at people and look at people on TV and realize they're not just the images they're portraying. They go home and they put their pants on one leg at a time and they use the toilet, and it's not a world of images. It's actually a world of flawed human beings and all of us trying to make the best of it.
What a beautiful way to describe that as two-dimensional and three-dimensional. And as we put up our facade, and I know I've done it, I imagine most people have, and this is the way I want you to see me. When the real me is three-dimensional, there's more to me. And it includes that sometimes I get angry. Sometimes I get my feelings hurt. Sometimes I'm happy. Sometimes I'm sad. I am all of these things. And how interesting that it's a study to how to human. It's like, I know how to do it wrong. How do I do it right? Did you find any examples of someone that did it right that you thought, oh, I could do that?
Well, I saw people approximating that over my life and that I tried to copy. And ironically enough, I ended up being disappointed many, many times, thinking, well, this person is closer to three dimension than I grew up with. They're not quite there until I met my second husband, who was a real successful guy. He was a financial advisor. He worked at Edward Jones. He made a lot of money, but he was ready and willing to be humble, to be human, to be insecure, um, to be three-dimensional. And the people that I met that he had surrounded with himself with on the west side of Cleveland, which was very different from the east side in all its snobbery, were all people that were three-dimensional. When I met his family for the first time, they talked about this, their whole plethora of feelings. There was no image creating. It was very honest. It was just self-deprecating. I had to clean my house before you came, or I have stomach problems today, or I have acne I'm dealing with. And they were just ready and willing to just be very human. And I sighed this big sigh of relief, and I thought, these are the kind of people that I want to be around. They're not pretending. They're not trying to get me to think of them in sort of a better light than they really are. I mean, they want me to see their strengths and their weaknesses and their fully human selves. And I realize I've finally landed at a place where I feel comfortable.
I'm so glad you found him and a whole family of people like him. That's a
Yes,
treasure. That is amazing. And I think it takes more confidence and real self-esteem to not require that facade, but to be. And I've heard it say that those that mind don't matter, and those that matter don't mind. And that means if I feel like I'm okay and I make a mistake and it bothers you, I think, well, you know what? Your opinion doesn't matter to me that much because the people that I care about know me, all of me, as a three-dimensional person, and they're okay with me. That's a beautiful, beautiful treasure. One other question I have for you is we started with I am a Goldberg, and then a huge question of who is Stacy? So now as you've been working your way through this journey, if I asked you now, who are you? What kind of response would you give?
I'm just trying to be the most authentic person that I can be. Um, I'm trying to help others be as authentic as they can be because I think that's really what leads to happiness. And that is what, when you look in the mirror, you feel good about. And that's what really fosters authentic relationships, which are really the relationships that are the most meaningful. Because I remember a doctor of mine in Menninger said to me once, to feel love and to feel understood are very much the same thing. And I realized that although I didn't want to think of myself this way growing up, I am a social being and I need relationships and I need authentic ones where I can authentically be myself. And I can really only authentically be myself if I feel like the person I'm dealing with is authentically being themselves. And I can really only feel love if I'm being authentically myself, because if I'm not presenting my authentic self, then I never actually feel love because I'm not being loved for who I really am, because I'm not presenting who I really am.
That is so huge. I'm just going to kind of repeat that, or you can repeat it. And that is when we're not our authentic self and we do get that love and that praise that we're seeking. That's why we put up the facade in the first place. Even if it works, it fails. Because if I try to act a certain way or present myself as perfect or brilliant or whatever, and people like that image, praise that image, it's not really me. And I don't have that real fulfillment of feeling loved because my mind will immediately say, well, yeah, they liked the image I portrayed, but they don't know me. They don't know the real me. And then it usually follows with, and if they did know the real me, they wouldn't like me. And that's a scary feeling where it just kind of piles on top of itself. So I love and appreciate what you said when I asked, who are you? The answer is, I'm me. I am all of me. I am my authentic self. And that includes my strengths. That includes my weaknesses. And that way, when someone says, Stacy, I like you, you can feel that comfort of they know me and they love me. And it is the same. So that was beautiful. Stacy, thank you for sharing today. I just feel like this is a message that we need to hear because I think most of us struggle at some level or another with feeling that desire to be liked and the desire to be known and the fear that goes between those two ideas. Is there anything that you want to make sure that we cover before we close today?
Well, I guess I just want to encourage people. I know for myself, I could fall on the track of, well, I just want to be with, the most glamorous people or the prettiest people or the smartest people, and I just want to impress them. But I want to encourage people to follow, if you want to feel really liked and loved, which is what you're talking about, to find people that you can really be honest with, because that's really the most fulfilling thing. And when you can, you don't have to tell your deepest, darkest secrets to everybody, but if you have a few people in your life that can really know all of you and accept you, that really helps you accept yourself. So to find those people that maybe you're not coveting after, oh, I really want to be friends with him or her because she's so smart or she's so pretty or she's so talented or she's got so much money, I want to be in that crowd. Maybe you might want to offer yourself, what about if I just find someone that I could really be myself with and talk about all aspects of myself, even the things I'm most ashamed of? Maybe that would go a much longer way than fitting into some crowd that you think is cool.
Excellent point. And I think it starts with being our authentic self. And then the people are attracted to us that like that one.
Yes.
Oh, excellent. Well, I appreciate you visiting with me today.
Thank you, Linda. I really like talking to you. You're so kind and gentle and smart, wise, and it's been really comfortable for me to open up, and I appreciate the time.
Thank you. That means a great deal to me. In closing, I'd like to share a quote by Debbie Ford. She said, "The greatest act of courage is to be and to own all of who you are, without apology, without excuses, without masks to cover the truth of who you are." Today, I invite our listeners to courageously be your authentic self. See you next time on Linda's Corner.
Thanks for listening. Please share and subscribe to help us reach new listeners. And if you'd like to heal your life from the inside out, there is a free video series at hopeforhealingfoundation.org. Just click on the free stuff tab. I also invite you to grab a copy of one of my books, like Crushed, A Journey Through Depression, and You Got This, an action plan to calm fear, anxiety, worry, and stress. See you next time on Linda's Corner.